What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Today we have on Paul. How you doing, Paul?
Hey, how's it going, Devin?
Wonderful, thank you. So
Good.
today we figured we would dig into tank crashes, why they happen, how you can prevent it, with and without controllers. And of course, we'll dig in a little bit of Apex and MXM stuff and follow up on some of the questions from the stream 2 weeks ago. So hopefully
Yeah,
everyone is having a wonderful day. How's your week or two been, Paul?
it's been awesome. It's been a great 2 weeks. I always love product launches. You get to see all of the work that you did over the preceding weeks and months come to fruition, and you get to see how customers experience that. You learn some things,
Mm-hmm.
and the customers delight you and surprise you, right? And the surprise can sometimes be in a bad way, but any feedback is good feedback because it
Yeah.
always means that people are engaged and they're excited, which I always like.
No, absolutely. Okay, we will definitely dig into this deeper in a little bit because yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear all like your perspective because I know all the questions I get asked all the time, so I'm curious to see if they're the same.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. And I
mhm.
mean, and then just on the topic for today, like tank crashes and redundancy,
Yeah.
it's like you have to look at everything in your aquarium and say, what will I do when this stops working?
Yep. Do you know what? Very, very true. This is a funny parallel. I was for my real job in IT. I was just up at a diamond mine last month, doing basically the same thing, like BCDR planning. So, when this happens, what's the backup? What's the failover? How to restore in this disaster? So, mini scale down version on tanks. Perfect timing.
It, but it's really, but I mean, like, it's so diamond mine, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that is like a huge, that's worth a lot of money, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. But like,
Corals,
these
so is coral.
aquariums are these aquariums are really hard to do,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to think about it. It's essentially like, maybe I said this the last time, I don't recall, but like it's something that Ryan from BRS said to me. It's like we're essentially like sending people into space with these aquariums, right?
Yeah.
Like that box and everything inside that box, we have to control that environment. And
Yeah.
how is that different from sending somebody to space?
Same thing.
It's not. It's kind of the same. I mean, there's different environmental constraints are not the same, but
Mhm.
it's not easy. So
You're in a capsule or a vessel. You're keeping stuff alive. You're providing, the right, oxygen or elements, whatever it is, keep alive. So, I mean, there is a lot of parallels, and it's a great example.
I love talking about tank redundancy, and
Heck yes.
can't wait to dive into that.
All
So
right. So, okay, full disclosure, I've never fully ever had a tank crash.
mhm.
I get asked a bazillion questions on stuff, so I have that kind of secondary advice perspective of it. Now, in your experience, what do you think is the most likely cause for a tank crash or something catastrophic to happen?
I mean, the two most likely reasons why aquariums are going to fail and fail quite quickly is due to electricity,
Mm-hmm.
due to temperature,
Yeah.
or due to structural
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a fair point.
and so some of those things you can help prevent.
Mm.
Some of those things you can have a really good uh, idea of when it's happening. So when you're in that situation, you are able to react to it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And half the battle is usually in the knowledge that it's happening.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If you're not there to fix it, you can't do much. If you're around, usually you can remediate in some method.
Yeah,
So,
I would, I think I think I'd also like to just, people in this chat, what sort of tank, crashes have you experienced, right? We
mhm.
can kind of about those, what they did, what they didn't do, and shameless plug. I'll probably tell you why an Apex could have could have prevented
I
it
expect
or
nothing less.
help you, But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it's not always about just having an Apex. It's also just knowing what the steps are you should take.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess in the first one, you know, usually in the fall you got more the hurricane season, at least on the East Coast. I hear a lot of that, and what that usually means is people are without power for a certain period of time. So that's probably one of the more common ones I see. Now, question for you: do you have a battery backup on your system at all?
My aquarium right now is at the office.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I have a great team there that we have a plan in place for when we lose power. And essentially, it's very well known when we lose power because 30 or 40 apexes make sure that we all know that about
Just
20,
blows
30
up.
minutes after it happens with the heartbeat feature.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have basically a kind of a level that that we all triage. Most of our aquariums do have a UPC on them, so that'll give
Mm-hmm.
us like 20, 30 minutes of, just pump circulation. And
Yep.
I usually spread out over a period of like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
At the 2 hour, 3 hour point, we usually escalate to a generator.
Yep.
And we have these extension. We have like all the extension cords ready to go, and can go from there. Because in California, what we get to experience is wildfire season. And what will happen in wildfire season is they'll have planned shutoffs. So when the
Ah.
wind is going to be high, and the conditions are quite dry, it's very possible, especially where we are in Morgan Hill. It's where essentially two kind of little mountain ranges, hill ranges come together, and we're in
Mm-hmm.
that valley between.
Yep.
So it's very common for us to have power shut down in the late summer.
Good to know.
They usually
Sadly,
know what's going to happen,
yeah.
So but
That
not
that
all.
that that definitely helps. Yeah, sadly, it seems to be fires are more and more common. At least where I am too. So far, so good this year, but usually there is a smoky period of summer. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
and
great
our
point.
friends on the East Coast in Canada right now. I mean, my heart goes out to you. I know exactly what you're going through. The day of my wedding day was the campfire, which is, I don't know
Oh,
if anyone
yeah.
remembers that. But it looks like some of my wedding photos, with the
I think I
sunset.
saw those actually. I recall
Looks like
those.
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
It was a great memory for sure.
Didn't
But
you go to a
it was
different
sad.
venue and like carry on somewhere, if I recall?
What's that?
Didn't you move your venue partway through and carry on?
No,
Was
no,
that
that
yours?
wasn't me.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I've heard of that, but no, we were fortunately. I mean, we were 100 miles south of where the campfire was, but
Mm-hmm.
just the smoke just envelops the whole
Ah,
area, like what's happening right now on the East
yep.
Coast.
Ah,
So
yikes. So yeah, that's no fun. Okay, in the
fun,
chat.
but
Hmm.
how do you deal with power loss, right?
Yep.
We have these environments that are, and the basically kind of the only long-term way you can deal with these things. You can do battery backups,
Hmm.
right? The Vortex are super easy to do with their battery backup
Yep.
solution. You'll typically get 48 hours out of it. And the biggest thing you need to maintain if you're not having to deal with a temperature issue, right,
Hmm.
is just flow,
Hands
right?
down, number one.
Yeah, if you can just keep flow in the aquarium, you may lose the sump, but flow in the aquarium is super important,
Yeah.
right?
Now, random question on that. How long do you think, when you said loses up, like after it's been stagnant for X amount of period, would you, I know like bioreactors, for instance, that's one thing that can go really funky if they're out for too long. And like you do not want to put that back in through your system. Bad things can happen.
No,
That's
no.
something you want to flush. But is there any other certain things you can think of offhand where too long is stagnant is trouble?
It really depends on your bio load, honestly, more than anything
Yeah,
else,
fair.
right? And what you have going on in the sump. If you have a relatively low bio load in your system, that
Hmm.
means your all system. That means that you don't have a bunch of bacteria in your sump too, right?
Hmm.
Which means that the level of die-off or algae die-off or anything else that you're going to have is going to be minimum. Algae and things like that are going to be just fine,
Yeah.
right? But
Oh, yeah.
after about 72 to 96 hours, you're going to start having issues with your fauna,
Hmm.
your cycle, things like that, and breaking it down. But it really is just quite dependent, in my experience.
Yep.
Now there are things that you can do to help this. All
Hmm.
right. So one of the things that happens in the aquarium once water stops flowing is oxygenation, right? So just the turnover and oxygen getting into the aquarium. There are things you can do that can help that. If you know that you're going to be in a prone area that loses electricity quite a bit. And my recommendation of that is actually run your tank a little bit on the cool side.
Hmm.
Percent of oxygen saturation between the difference of like 79, 80 degrees versus like 74, 75 degrees, it's
Huge.
almost it's a huge difference,
Yeah.
right? So if you can run a cooler aquarium, because you air condition your house or anything like
Mhm.
that, that's going to keep the saturation of oxygen much higher in your aquarium. So you're going to be at a
Great
good
point.
place. You're going to be starting at a better place. Granted, in the summer it may start to get really hot in there, but
Hmm.
that oxygen isn't just going to disappear,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be consumed, and then getting it reoxygenated isn't the issue. And just
Hmm.
always have an air stone.
Yeah.
Don't, we're not talking about micro bubbling. We're not going to get into that debate today. But,
Yeah.
throwing an air stone in front of your power head's a great idea as well.
It is. The battery backup ones too. They're inexpensive. I mean, it could definitely save you in a pinch. I
I
know
think
I don't know
two,
where they
two,
are, but I have
two or
them somewhere.
they're between $200 to $300, depending,
Yeah.
and the UPCs and things like that. I'd probably just say don't waste your time with it, right? When you do that AC to DC conversion and everything
Mhm.
else, you just lose so much efficiency in that. So, I mean, the kind of UPCs that you need to get to really be able to be in a situation and be successful, you just have
They're big
just this
boys.
monster UPC that's not
Hmm.
manageable, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
After
so,
after all my years of reefing, I finally invested in some like proper backup. So this winter, I actually bought a generator from Costco when it was on sale, which
mhm.
is the long term one. And then I splurged on this the other day. What was again at Costco? I saw it. So it's the
Yeah.
500 and something watt hour lithium iron phosphate battery. So that's like my short term backup, and then long term bust out the Gen E if required.
That lithium phosphate battery is going to save you so much heartache.
Oh
Number
yes.
one, number one, because it'll be easy to transition over to. What
Yep.
I would probably do on that is I would just take one of your like ED832s
Hmm.
and just power it normally through there. Right, so then it will be basically getting power, and then make sure that EV832 has some of your 24-volt flow equipment.
Yeah.
So put a wave or two, there directly, so then
Hmm.
you won't have a big DC to AC conversion loss or anything like that,
Yep.
and you'll be super successful as a result of it. You
The
know,
other selling feature, at least for me, is you can run it like a UPS mode, so you can run off it and charge it at the same time.
that,
So basically, use like a UPS in a sense. So I thought it was a really cool way to go. Again, too, we also mentioned like the MP40s, which I also do have that battery backup. But so I might use this more for the return pumps and extra flow. But having that built-in battery backup port just makes it super duper easy. Quick
yeah,
shout out earlier, John Reefer Vermont. Thanks for the super chat. He had 2 tank crashes 23 years ago and left the hobby for 20 years. See, the tank
mhm.
crashes are devastating. That sucks. I'm very sorry to hear that. A 300-gallon tank too. That's a
and,
big one.
it, and it's heartache too. I mean, I
Hmm.
can't. I can't. I mean, I've sold some aquariums and had to move on from aquariums before. And I've seen aquariums go downhill, but I've never had that experience where it's just like done.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Same.
So,
I've had like where I've lost some corals, but never like everything. And it is heartbreaking. Like it sucks losing anything in a tank.
we talked about kind of these planned electrical
Yep.
outages. So that's the hurricane coming. That's them turning off my power in California for the greater good. All these things.
Greater good. Not of your
Sorry.
fish tank, but someone's greater good.
Keep my subjectivity out of this. And but then you have these experiences where you don't know that you're going to lose power,
Hmm.
right? So how do you stay informed about that? Um, and so there are tools that the Apex can offer.
Yeah.
Heartbeat option. You can probably also contact your power company and sign up for power alerts and things like that. So
Hmm.
when these sort of things do happen, hopefully you're at home or relatively close to home and you can move on it. If you or me want to share screen real quick, we can just basically review Heartbeat.
Sure.
If you don't have it
Here,
enabled, absolutely enable it.
I'll
And I'll
put you.
kind of do that real quick.
I'll put you full screen.
Okay.
Yeah. So heartbeat is definitely a good one, and that was. I guess it's not enabled by default just because of like new
Yeah.
Apex setup,
So
right?
it's one of those things that me as the customer experience person gets really irritated about that it's not enabled by default, right?
Hmm.
But there's reasons why. So let's go over just a heartbeat real quickly. Okay. So essentially, to be able to enable heartbeat, right, you have to be the owner or the manager of the aquarium. It has to be linked to Fusion, and it
Hmm.
needs to be currently connected, and the connection needs to be reliable. Okay.
Yeah.
We have different criteria for reliable. Okay. But essentially, if these are all the disconnections that we've had, and you can see there was some internet outages last night, is why those essentially kind of are there.
Yeah.
But if you disconnected like 130 times in the last 24 hours, it doesn't make much sense for us to enable heartbeat, right? But we can enable it, and go from there with it. What that will now do is, if your Apex for some reason gets powered off, if your Apex loses connection to the network, so you're not getting alerts and notifications, or if uh, or you have some hardware issue or something like that, right? With the base unit itself, you would then get the ability to get an alert saying like, "Hey, we're not connected. We don't know why." But one of the big reasons for that is your Apex possibly could not have power,
Yep.
right? It's right. It's hidden. It's a little bit hidden. So, if you're on your dashboard on a phone, you see this like kind of white area that has like your name and the name of the
Hmm.
system there. Just click on it, go down to heartbeat.
Perfect.
Um, we have been working on something that will essentially give you the ability to, oh, big Paul, the ability to get notifications
Yep.
when you don't have certain like smart things set up like that,
Hmm.
right? And uh, Not a feature that's been employed yet, but one we're considering. Basically,
Nice.
something called like a persistent reminder, if you will. Like, hey, you should probably put on heartbeat. And
It'll keep
say,
bugging you.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
but the big thing about bugging people is they have to. If someone does not want to be bugged, do not bug them. You're only
Well,
antagonizing if you leave it there.
I think for that to work is not just tell you to do it, but you click on it and it'll take you to
Yes,
the page to
it
enable
takes you there,
and
obviously.
does it
Yes,
for you
but it
basically, and all you do is
would
hit save.
absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Much like, with the MXM setup, you plugged in the MXM, there was a big MXM icon there that said,
Hmm.
hey, show me how to set it up. And it would drop you off on the videos on how to set it up, you
Yep.
know? So,
Exactly. Phil in the chat, why does Neptune have heartbeat off by default? I'm guessing it's just because the moment you set up a new Apex, it would keep trying to bug you about it.
yeah.
That's
So,
my guess. Yeah.
in a lot of situations when you're setting up a system for the first time, there's times when you're going to basically have it on and off and all these things, and if you were to set it up and then turn it off, you would just start getting these heartbeat alerts.
Hmm.
And so the real way to do this is to have an intelligence there that like, oh hey, this has been set up for 72 hours.
Yeah.
This guy has a reliable connection. We should recommend that he turns on heartbeat if it's off.
Hmm.
And that's a feature that we're looking to enable in forthcoming app updates and stuff like that. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dude, lots of stuff in the chat about people generators. It seems to
Oh,
be.
good, good. I mean, I really like it when people are, you know, involved in these things. It's
You know, it
questions, please.
it makes me happy to see that many people invest into a generator, and it's one of those things that I mean, it's a good $1,000 plus. Like it's not the cheapest thing, but when you think of how much money you spend on your tank, like at some point, it is a wise investment.
The only comment I'll make about a generator purchase is there are different types of generators.
Hmm.
Some are very good, and some are just get the job done. If you have a just get a job done generator, so it doesn't create basically, it's not a sine wave generator.
Hmm.
Okay. That means that it's not going to be friendly to electronic equipment. So in those sort of situations, it's a really good idea to pull out your old mag drive pump, right, and plug those into,
Yeah.
your dirty generators, if you will.
Could
Um,
I have a
right?
question? I don't know if you know
Yeah,
the answer, but
yeah.
could you plug a UPS into a generator and use that to clean your power before the tank? Because like
I
APCs usually have pure sine wave, right? So would it
Yeah.
take?
I would have to fall back on somebody more intelligent than I. or more knowledgeable, I should say, than I on these things. But I think that's a good question. I don't have the answer to.
Yep.
Maybe somebody on the stream knows. But that'd be one really good way to do it.
Yeah, a good way. Yeah, and of course, I mean, if you're in an apartment or somewhere where you can't use a generator, that the battery style generators are a great way to go, at least for shorter powerages.
Those lithium phosphate batteries are awesome. Do them.
Yes.
I've had a couple of friends that have switched over, and their entire situation that they have quite a few of the batteries. It's quite an elegant solution.
Nice. I love it. One day I was very close, but it's a very big investment. At some point I might build, like, you can get the 48 volt, like, off-grid kind of UPS mode ones, and you get the 48 volt batteries and just build like a nice big run all my tank backups. But that'll be a big endeavor one day.
We've been considering the power wall for our house, but just to make life a lot easier with the planned shut-offs and things like that. But these are big investments that you're like, I don't know.
Hey, it took me like 8 years to talk myself into buying a generator finally. So there you go. One day. Okay, so power, that's obviously one of the biggest ones. I mean, super duper budget. I mean, battery operated air pump. Next level up would be like, battery based backup and, a little bit more, or might even be less, depends on the generator, but then a generator for extended. So that's kind of takes in apart the power consideration of an outage.
Just in terms of, there's so many pump specific battery backups. Those usually give you enough time to come up with a better long-term solution if it's going to go term. Yes, they should be, they're $200 to $300, but they're worth every penny of it. Do it.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Have one. It's not a bad idea just to go check, especially in the storm season. It's not a good idea to check just to make sure that it's still a healthy battery. The batteries on those don't say good forever.
Fair points.
Or make sure that after a couple of years, they do need to be replaced.
Yep. No, very, very true. Okay, so we got power down. Next most common thing, probably heat for tanks, either overheating or not as much on the cool side, but usually it's overheating. I know certain areas people have to run chillers for the tank, right? And if you don't have power, your tank's just going to get hotter over time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is where an Apex can have its weight in gold, right? It controls your heater on off. You have alerts to let you know when temperature is getting too high. Can have redundancy built in. So we said earlier in this stream, you have to look at everything in your aquarium and say, what will I do when this stops working?
Yeah.
Right. So let's say, for example, your Apex stops working, and now the heater is just on its own. You would want to have it set to be fallback on, but then that heater has its own internal thermostat, right? So that's either done with another external controller, or it's done with an internal thermostat on the heater. It's why I always loved my old school Eheim glass heaters, right? I set the temperature on those to 80 degrees. And if things go wrong, number one, I'm going to know about that because I've set up alerts appropriately on my Apex. And number two, that the worst that's going to happen is just going to keep the tank up to like 80 degrees, the internal thermostat behind. The other really super powerful thing is the power usage alarm. So we'll talk about it in relation to heaters. But if, for example, if we wanted to, we go to a tank that has that, it's your screen over there. I'll go to this person's tank. They're whole lot messy around. Yeah. Tasks. All right. So, screen. And back when I used to do Let's Talk Reef, I would always talk about this, right? The power usage alarms. So you essentially have a task, right? What's a task? A task is a quick way to do something without having to do programming, okay? And in this situation, we want to talk about power, right? So we would click on power, and then we say, well, what do we want to worry about? Well, we probably want to worry about a heater, okay? And just based on, we look at what the heater's normal power consumption should be. This heater apparently never turns on, right? So it has a very interesting power usage alarm. Let's check
Yeah.
his other. This heater sometimes turns on, apparently. But yeah,
Barely.
knowing where this aquarium is, I'm not surprised that the heater never turns on here. Or it's been super warm, so it's not been there recently. But the nice thing is, if the outlet is on and it's not pulling the minimum power,
Mhm.
it would then send you an alert.
Would
That's the
what
case.
would happen if you have a heater controller in the middle? So what if it's like your outlet turns on the heater controller, which then turns on the heater? Like you have multiple levels. Would that
Well,
still work in those
typically,
scenarios?
if it's going to be plugged into a heater controller, that heater controller is actually going to go ahead and typically consume the same amount of power as the heater turning on, right? So when the heater basically turns on, that heater controller bumps up quite a bit. So it
Yeah.
consumes a very small amount of power, maybe 5 watts when it's
Mm.
not on. When the heater's
Okay.
not on, the heater's on. Your 200-watt heater maybe consumes 170 watts or so.
Okay.
This can also be indicative of, when we see those sorts of things, when we start seeing those things go suddenly much higher,
Mm.
that could be indicative of the heater beginning to fail for some reason or another. So we knew before it was always like 170 watts, but now it's more like 190, 200 watts. The element essentially is shorting probably or doing something like that. Or you have the other inverse of that where that 170 watts now is pulling 160 watts, 150
Hmm.
watts. And that's basically it's not making as good a contact as it used to in that element. So
That makes sense. So
yeah, and I love this for just in terms of power usage alarms. Equipment failure is obviously kind of always the reason why these things happen,
mhm.
right? So when we talk about redundancy, it's what if the return pump goes out, right?
Yeah.
You don't know, how can you know the return pump goes out? There's a
Mhm.
couple of reasons how you know that.
Yeah.
One, you can see ORP start to fall in your aquarium. That'd be one
Mhm.
way to know. If you have a flow meter on your aquarium, you would stop seeing flow. But again, these power usage alarms. If that return pump is supposed to be on, the alert would go off that like, hey, we're not consuming power, or we're consuming less power, or we're consuming way more power.
Mhm.
Um, if that pump is cavitating, what happens in cavitation is, the impeller spinning and it sucks up a little bit of water, and power consumption essentially is a little bit normalized. But then all of a sudden there's no water to suck in. So it starts to spin
Yeah.
super fast and the water actually drops because there's now no resistance there. So you start
Mhm.
seeing very erratic behavior in power consumption there, which the power usage alarm would help out with.
Hmm.
The only other final thing really on this is redundancy in your probes and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, it's never made sense to me why someone would only have a temperature probe in their sump or only have a temperature probe in their tank, right?
Mhm.
If you were to only have one, I would probably put it in the overflow, if anything.
Yeah.
I know we want that nice probe rack where all of our probes are lined up, in the sump, right? And that's okay for the one down there. But what will happen is if tank water flow stops,
Mhm.
everything's okay down in
Yeah.
the
The
sump.
differential.
The heater is down in the sump. You're just keeping that environment down there perfect. Meanwhile, up in the tank, where
Yeah.
things are actually living, life isn't so great. You know,
That's a good one actually.
yeah.
I have not done that because I avoid any wires in my tank.
I
But
appreciate that.
yeah, but I do have two probes, but one's just like at room temperature, one's the tank temperature. I have one just like chilling out the back of my cabinet just for, I don't know, don't if the room gets super hot. But
Yeah.
that's a good point. And same with the power usage alarms, right? It's alerting of equipment failure, so nothing bad, builds up and happens. It's that heads up to deal with it.
Yeah, and the power usage alarms for me are just one of the my favorite
Hmm.
Apex features for sure. I like that number one that it's something that's just built into the product and just works.
Hmm.
I like that we tell you what the upper and lower range should be if you run the task, so there's no real guessing or questions or
Yeah.
anything like that. And I don't quote me on this. Maybe another product out there does this, but at the time of its release and for a good number of years,
Hmm.
we're the only ones who really offered this feature. you know. And I think that knowing power consumption gives you so much insight to how a product is working, not
Yeah.
working, health of the product, all those sorts of things.
Future suggestion: have
Yeah,
like a after like 30 days, have like this like tune my apex button that just like enables all these like things that
oh,
people
yeah,
should be using, just like a self
definitely.
tuning, because it's enough
It,
time to build the data and
it's that same kind of thing with the heartbeat, right?
yeah,
That something that we're considering is, having the understanding that you've never set up power alerts,
mm-hmm.
right? And at this
Yeah,
point, we have all of the information about how your equipment runs,
exactly.
right? So how about we set those up with you, right? And you click on it, and it just takes you to the power usage task right away. I think that'd be something that I'd love to
Yeah,
see, something that I know that's on our list.
yeah.
So
So I don't know. You've inspired me to start enabling more power alarms. I use it to trigger things, but I don't necessarily use it to like alert me. So I'm gonna dig more into that.
well, I mean, like take a skimmer for example.
Yep.
All right. So when your skimmer is not creating skimming, right? So what's not happening in that situation? That could be because your venturi's clogged.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when your venturi's clogged, the skimmer actually consumes more power because it takes a lot more work just to push water than
Mm-hmm.
it does to push water and air,
Yeah.
right?
Very true.
So if you were to so for me, when I'm not doing good to my aquarium and cleaning my pumps out and my skimmer out and things like that, what eventually starts happening is my pump is running,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not actually pulling any air through it,
Yeah.
right? And so I have an alert set up to say like, oh hey, so I know this is going on, and then I'll come in the office and I'll blow some air through it, and then starts working correctly. I'm like, I should really do a citrus bath on that, and
Mm-hmm.
the next time it happens, I tell myself that
Yeah.
again, and,
Yeah, I know.
and in this
But
perpetual state now for a little bit.
this is stuff that is heads up to prevent a disaster, right? So I mean, of course, you still got to act on it, and I know we're all good at ignoring and delaying it. But okay,
Well,
I just had a great thought.
we're lazy. It's why we do
We are.
automate.
I know. We spend all our time doing automation to be lazy, but it's worth
Yep.
it. Niagara Corals, he goes, just put in your overflow. Great. This might be a terrible idea or it might be a great idea. I could fish the heater up the trickle or emergency drain. So you just have the tiny wire running in the pipe and hide it in my overflow box. Like, yes, I'd be stealing like 4 or 5 millimeters of space in my pipe, but I could theoretically hide it
I,
without having any wires in the tank. Probably
I
a terrible
mean,
idea, but
if
I just thought
you
of it.
know, if you were so inclined and the wire really does bug you, that would be a good solution.
Yeah.
It would keep technically the wire mostly out of the aquarium,
Yeah.
and it would give you that knowledge because you'd probably put it to that point in your overflow box where it's just
Hmm.
sitting in water a little
Yeah.
bit, and so then when the overflow drop box drops a little bit, it's now in
Yeah.
the air, and hypothetically the water would change. And it is a beautiful thing.
I like
Like,
it. There's some
yeah,
potential here.
yeah.
It's got to fish the connector through without getting it drenched. But yeah, I like it. Potential.
You could do it. You just this shouldn't be that hard. And honestly, even if you do get the connector wet,
RODI dip.
just dip it in RODI and give it a good clean. If you get corrosion on it, you just take some steel wool on it. Boom, you're
Yeah.
done. You know? So
No. So true. John Reefer Vermont. Thanks for the super chat. Can't get them to match read above. I
just
have
try
two. I have
just try
two.
to get my attention here. Hold on.
Yeah.
I have two slips. I can't get the map to them. So sliding 3 days later, sliding probe is 35. The other probe say 33 or less. So this is my recommendation on that. Number one, make sure that when you're calibrating them. So John is having trouble having two salinity probes match. So number one, make sure that when you calibrate them both in the same vessel. Okay. So while calibrating, you basically have them in the same type of water. So one really good way to do that is actually just to use your tank water, not to use
Mm,
calibration solution. With salinity, you're probably already verified that through your different checkers and everything else to be at the salinity you want to be at. Let's say you keep 34 or 36, it really doesn't matter. We're going to calibrate it and say your water is just 35. If you keep it at 34, you know that's the case, but both your probes are in the same water vessel when that happens.
mm,
Okay, so calibrate them in the same system. The second part of that is if you're using temperature compensation or something like that, we will only temperature compensate to the first probe in the system. Okay.
Good to know.
So if you have a salinity probe one place versus the other place, and there's a temperature differential in those situations, it's only going to use the temperature probe that's connected to the base unit per se, right? So that could be another thing. Of course, if those things don't necessarily answer the question, feel free to reach out to our support team. Ping, make sure they know about it. I know about it. I'd be happy to do it.
Okay,
So.
awesome. The other note too that I've noticed in the past too is one, make sure there's no like air bubbles or anything on it. Make sure it's like fully submersed. And the other little bit of note, I know at some point when I had it running beside higher power wires, it wasn't as stable. When I separated it, had a larger gap from other higher voltage wires, then it was super stable after I did that. So I just like poked it through a different hole in my stand. That's just another pro tip that may or may not be related.
And it's like a 10 foot
Yeah.
cable. So you're trying to manage all these different things. So that's another thing to be cognizant of.
Yeah.
If you buy like an Abyss pump too, those are such great pumps, but they throw out these huge magnetic fields that essentially the salinity probe in particular is dislikes that. So.
That's fair. Random question for you. Salinity probe, can it be completely submerged? Like, does it need to be partially out of water at all, or is it?
All right. So it's probably okay. But the official support answer would be like, no, don't do that, because there is a point when the wire comes into the probe, right? And that is water sealed. Like anything in life, even if it's set up to be water sealed, at some point water will get into it. When water doesn't, it will go into the probe.
Okay.
Right. I really like Vivid's SPS kit. Salinity, their Salinity essentially stability kit, which essentially just pushes water in through the probe and constantly pushes off air bubbles. That's a great thing if you are running into that air bubble situation, So
No, that's a pretty clever little product. I like it. I was asking about the Salinity probe because I was debating if I throw one in my mixing bin. I was like, okay, can I just set it in the bottom of the bin, or do I put on a little piece of like styrofoam or something to make it a bit of a bobber so it just goes up and down with the water level? And
just what I was going to say. If you're salinity probes in a mixing bin, just put them in the styrofoam. And remember, when you drill through styrofoam, drill it in at an angle, right? So so that hole is on the side, and so air bubbles just roll off nice and easy.
Great point. It's on my future to-do list.
You always want it to be like straight up and down and everything, but no, not on the Salinity probe. I was always waiting for that one sump design of somebody who like really thought about it, and they have, the built-in probe racks, but then this one's for the Salinity probe and is at a 5-degree angle, right? But it would throw everybody's OCD off a little bit with it being slightly curved.
Well, you could always mount it upside down too, but again, with like water seeping in eventually, mileage may vary.
Yep.
Port Wolf, asking if there's any chance of a solid state flow sensor. Mechanical ones give me trust issues as far as cleaning. Have you ever looked into or solid state flow sensors?
Other than the fact, no, not particularly, but it's always a cost question more than anything. Right? How much are you willing to spend on it, and what percent of the market is willing to spend that much? Right?
Probably small.
And so the fact that you know about that, you're probably willing to spend what it is required. But then the next question is how many other people out there are like just like you, that answer typically tends to be less than we would all like.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so power flow. Other common things are tank crash. Things being overdosed to a tank. So if you do have a pH monitor, usually that will tell you if you're dosing your tank with some form of alkalinity solution by monitoring the pH, because those generally up your pH. That could be indicative of, like a Kalkwasser overdose or something else happening.
So if you use Kalkwasser, there's a couple things that I strongly recommend. Number one, make sure that your on-off is based on time, it's based on water level, and it's based on pH. right?
Yep.
So any of those things happen, the calc flosser is turning off. And always, always, always just put like just buy our ATK or buy something to have a float valve,
Hmm.
right? So at the point that something goes wrong, only that much calc flosser can ever be put in there,
Yeah.
right? Because it's those calclossers that just kind of go run rampant and dump 5 gallons in at one time that are just critical. Again, if you use an Apex, right, we can help tell you those things
Hmm.
because we are monitoring a lot of those different levels using the liquid level sensor or pH or any of that stuff.
Yeah. And
So.
then again, your pH gets too high, turn off your dosing pumps. I have been very deep down the pH rabbit hole the last little while, and I think I got up to 8.76 the other day. So I finally implemented a bunch of code, like, okay, if I'm above 8.5, turn this off, turn this off, turn this off, and it's all those little fail safes.
There is a point, sir, that it becomes too much.
But what is too much? I've been trying to figure that out. But yeah,
That's a good. So at this point, you would need long term
yeah.
you were to keep your tank at a very high pH, right?
Hmm.
But keep your tank at a very high pH. What are you also going to have to do? You have to make sure consumption of alkalinity and all these things is also very high,
Yeah,
right? So and you have to keep oxygen really high and all of these different things to run a situation like that.
it's a rabbit
So
hole.
yeah, it's a rabbit hole,
Yep.
but my always thing is keep whatever you do, just keep it consistent, right?
Yep.
The biggest thing that we found that I loved with the Trident was that just like all of a sudden there were no more alkaline swings,
Yeah.
right? We were able to finally narrow down those, and what happened when we were able to keep those in a very small range is a lot of good things,
Hmm.
and it was kind of the just what we saw in our own tanks is holy shit, we keep on, excuse me, we
It's all good.
we keep on dumping alkalinity at
Yeah.
night to try to keep the pH up, but that's like jumping our DKH by two, typically
Hmm.
2 or 3. And then suddenly we said, all right, let's start putting 70% of our alkalinity in the day and 30% at night.
Yep.
And yeah, pH fell a little bit, but not a whole lot, you
Hmm.
know? When CO2 isn't the problem, that pH, as long as CO2 isn't the thing pushing it down, you're just fine, you know?
Yep.
So,
So, in your opinion, what is an acceptable elk swing? Like
uh,
point
I,
one, point two. Like, what are you like okay with? What do you like? Hey, we
the
gotta tighten
difference,
this up.
the difference between point one, point two, it's
Not much.
doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I think when we start talking about I'm at 8 DKH and then I'm going to 9 and I'm falling down to 7,
Yeah.
right? When you're getting that plus or minus 1 in a day, I wouldn't go much past that. The nice thing
Hmm.
about the Trident, it's super easy to get that down to plus or minus zero point 0.5, right? Plus or minus zero point 0.3. And the
Hmm.
tighter those things, I think the more success that you're going to see.
Yeah. No, definitely. Do ATK bracket. Yeah, a couple people talk about the ATK brackets. Yeah, I do really appreciate the built-in float valve. I think that's like a huge added safety.
Yeah, and that's one of my one of my favorite things about the ATK for sure.
Yeah,
So,
that and the dual level sensors.
that product had a lot of just small improvements to it over the years.
Hmm.
Didn't make a lot of hay about, but if you've used it recently, you've probably had a great experience with it. Updated sensors are in it. The pump is more reliable than I feel it's ever been.
Nice.
So just making small improvements over time to where it's a very solid experience. You
Beauty.
know.
I'm gonna have to get a new one and see the difference. Like mine's
I think
extremely old, but still going strong.
they're very small things. So one thing was just how we encapsulated the wire coming into the
Yep.
probe to the optical sensor.
Hmm.
That typically we were having, in the early years of it, we had a lot of optical sensor failures because of just a small amount of water
Hmm.
intrusion. We made some adjustments there, so that's much less common. We then switched from the version 1 of the PMUP to the version 2 of the PMUP. The biggest
Hmm.
reason people had PMUP issues was we didn't have the overdrive current protection on there.
Okay.
And so people's reservoirs would just go empty. And then
Hmm.
these PMUPs would just be, running away in there. So that
Yep.
we'd get these little grenades of PMUPs, right? Of like where it swelled and everything.
Yeah.
And once we had the version 2 PMUP, that essentially knows it senses cavitation,
Hmm.
right? And it turns
Huh.
itself off.
Well, that's
So,
cool. That's a cool feature,
so
actually.
very nice. if there is water in there, we're not pumping it, but likely
Yep.
the reason I would have cavitation is because there's no water, and
Yeah.
you didn't do what you're supposed to.
Huh.
And we have other great products that can help you tell there's no water in the reservoir.
Yeah.
So,
Now, is that some brains in the Apex, or is that built into the PMUP itself?
well, built into the PMUP itself.
Huh. Very cool. I like that. It's a cool feature.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So just with the ATK thing, I believe I replaced one of the optical sensors, but I also beta tested it. So I've had it a long time. That's before it even came out. So
Yeah.
that's why I was curious what all changed.
So Devin, I've really been enjoying the stream. I did want to talk a little, we could talk more about tank catastrophes, and I think this is probably a subject we could revisit on another day. But I did want to talk a little bit about MXM, how the launch went, and all that, if we have a moment or two.
It's on your background. We're obligated.
I know it will.
2 weeks ago, we did our kind of unveil launch stream about the MXM. And yeah, definitely. What are some of the most common questions or things that you've had since then about it?
So first off, it was a launch, and I have a little list here. Hold on, let me find my list.
Right.
There it is. So first off, it did. I was humbled, with kind of how many people wanted to have this level of integration. When I was kind of thinking about, well, our customers will be excited about it, but you guys were super excited about it. BRS sold out on, I think, within before the end of the day, right? And they had a nice allotment, and I'm pretty sure if you go to any of our local fish stores now, you'd be pretty lucky to find one as well. Right. So it was a product that had really great launch in terms of customer reception and things like that. And overall, we've been getting a lot of great feedback about it. And feedback can be feedback that is positive, right? And feedback that is critical. Both types of that feedback is great because it allows us to kind of check ourselves, right? And have what can we improve upon, right? Or what did we do a great job at, And so the things that I think that worked incredibly well is number one, just the out of box experience in the sense of I've connected this MXM module, and now I'm taking these Mobius devices and I'm getting them attached to this MXM module. One thing, that I got up at the Magna meetup in where was it? Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, it'll be here by Christmas, and I've been roasted and roasted and roasted, about not having it here at Christmas. So why, did it take, the time? And I think that in that time, if you've used Mobius, it's got, we've improved it. I'm hearing better customer feedback about it. People were already having good experiences there, but I think they're having experiences that are a little bit more consistent. And I think the MXM is something to help do that. So that connection process went very well for folks. So much so that the number of support cases that we have of people having connection issues with MXM are very small.
Nice.
Not something that would be shy. So that was a huge positive. I also love that people had an experience that they knew, right? If they've used the core, if they've used the wave, if they've used the sky, if they've used anything else in Apex Fusion, guess what? It was exactly the same.
Yeah. So I only use a single sky. This might be a sky feature, but I wasn't aware of it because I only ever played as a single sky. Never had more than one. But with the Radions, because I got 5 Radions in my tank, once I learned about how to group the lights, that made it a much more pleasant experience when you can program it all in like a single group. Like that was like
exactly.
Nice. And I don't know if that was something I just wasn't aware of, or if it came out after I started testing.
So that was a learning that I've had, right? So we documented the grouping experience during Sky, right? We could have done a better job at making sure that people understood how to group, I think, on day one. I'm going to have an update soon to our documentation page that will demonstrate grouping a little bit better.
Yes.
So you know how to put all of your lights into the same can. So if you have 10 lights, you're not going and turning 10 things on or off, or programming 10 things and stuff like that, and group them all together. You program once, you turn on and off once, and you're
Yeah.
um, the other part there was about 24 hours after launch, I had most all of the templates loaded into schemes.
Hmm.
And I think, schemes are one of those things we've had forever.
Yeah.
But it's something that the documentation could have spent some time going over. And I say this with a caveat because how many people actually read documentation? I would say it's probably a small number. But what typically happens, though, is the few of us out there that do read
Hmm.
documentation will then expunge the information out in the socials and things like that. So,
Yeah.
for what it's worth, all of the things like AB plus mode, radiant color mode, SPS mode, David Saxby's 37-point schedule for hydros and primes, and soon possibly Devin's scheme. He may. So the one thing that's interesting about schemes is they only apply to the device you're uploading. So that means that if you have an XR30 Blue Gen 6 and you upload that scheme, the only other people that can see that scheme are other people who have an XR30 Blue Gen 6. So somebody would have to go in and have all the devices to have a scheme available on everything.
Hmm.
But the nice thing about an Apex 2 is you don't have to have a file or anything like that. You can just go and copy the program and
Hmm.
paste it into a chat, and somebody
Yeah.
can use it just like that.
So,
So,
so there is like the T code that one could copy and paste and just import it.
which humans don't understand, but
No,
that's
or
Apex.
or or I can bribe Paul to hopefully replicate it onto the other models for me later, so that it will just show up for everybody and not just XR3 Pros.
So, we can do that. Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you,
No problem,
thank you,
Devin.
thank you.
Happy to do that. So that's
Appreciated.
one thing that was a learning. So we could have done some documentation things a little bit better, and I think you'll see that documentation stuff improving.
Yeah.
The other thing, is, and I think this is probably the biggest overall insight that I've had. The
Hmm.
experience we delivered on the MXM was very similar to the WXM.
Hmm.
And loved the WXM. It
Yeah.
broke our heart when we weren't able to continue that support process because it became a little bit cumbersome because of when Mobius came out, and we weren't friendly, or we weren't working with our good friends at Ecotech now, who I now
Yep.
love working with them, and
Hmm.
we're all one big happy family in that sense. But so when we stopped making the WXM, it was too much rancor of our
Yep.
customers.
Hmm.
With that said, the experience we delivered on the MXM is better than the WXM,
Yeah, I'd
but
agree.
it's a very similar experience. And I
Yeah.
think our customers, because of things like the Trident, things like the Sky,
Hmm.
things like the A3, have such, in my opinion, really great out of box experiences. They expected the same thing with the MXM.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a worthwhile thing to expect.
Yep.
So the fact that we didn't have sync or anti-sync in there on launch, there's reasons for that. And it didn't work the way we expected it to work. But I expect that will be something that you will see in the future.
Okay.
We might
You
get.
beat me to my
You know,
question. I was going to ask, is it going to happen or is it coming? Okay.
yeah. I mean, I think that that's very likely.
Okay. Nice.
The Versa support would absolutely love to see that at launch. Would
Hmm.
love to see it in the future, and I think it's very likely that we'll probably see that in the future.
So future hope. No, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
so you can have Trident controlled dosing and maybe support for a Versa in the future, right?
Oh, cool.
But it's not something that I can say today is, well, that's definitely 100% coming. But it's very likely. You know, we
I'll take
want
likely.
all of our equipment to play wonderfully together.
Yeah.
But then there were other things that's like the configuration's not coming over. Um, that was a that that for me was something that we did put an interstitial up, like telling you that was going to be the
Hmm.
case. But got a lot of feedback that people would have really liked to have seen that.
Hmm.
Um, for reasons that it's probably not going to be a feature we're going to be able to add in. right?
Yeah.
So the templates and the schemes are a good way to be able to start that. And if you have a custom program, I would say start with a scheme, right? And, make it your
Mm.
own, just like you probably did when you first, got your, when you got it hooked up on Mobius,
Yep.
right? As much as the MXM module uses Mobius, it is a user interface style, an Apex
Yeah.
experience, right? So you can't expect necessarily for all those features that you had in Mobius to be in the Apex.
Hmm.
But we'll try to add as many of them as we can, and improve upon all that. So
Yep. Definitely. Niagara Fire Curls, thank you for the super chat. Thank you for your
yeah,
efforts you put into live streams. Appreciate it. Thank you.
yeah.
And John, thank you as well, belated, for your earlier super chat. Okay, this is a funny one. You like this one, Paul. Tons of Apex. He goes, when do you know if you're an Apex maniac? 4 EB8s, 5 PM modules, 3 breakout boxes, 2 H probes, 2 salinity probes, 2 temperature probes, and the sump on the main tank. I love my controller. So you got tons.
I love that. Obviously for so many reasons.
Yeah.
We did have like Control Freak awards, like at some point in the past.
Hmm.
It's something worthwhile to bring back. Where we can, just like feature experts, right, and
Yeah.
feature systems and things like that. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Nice. Um, Manoj, if I'm saying your name right, can we still use WXM and AWN modules? I've never used AWM. Do they work? Are they
Yeah,
alive? Yeah.
they work. So the AIs have gone through several iterations of how they connect, right?
Hmm.
And you've had Wi-Fi, you've had which work with our IOTA, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't require any additional purchase as long as you have an A2 or an A3, they'll be
Hmm.
compatible. You have ones that only worked on Bluetooth, ones
Hmm.
that worked on their proprietary kind of Zigbee channel. The
Hmm.
AWM was that product that allowed them to work on the proprietary Zigbee channel. So
Okay.
I am not going to try to remember the names because
Yeah.
I will definitely mess up. But the ones that worked on like the AI director,
Yeah.
right? Those are the
Ah.
on the
Okay.
AWM.
All
Okay,
right. That makes
that's
sense.
how
I was.
far back,
Yeah.
right? And then you have the other ones that work on Wi-Fi with IOTA, and
Hmm.
then you have that are essentially Bluetooth, more or less, that work with the MXM module.
Compatibility through the ages.
Yeah, the WXM, sure, have it,
Yep.
have it all. Have your Radeon, your Gen 4 Radeons, and your Mobius compatible Vortex. The Apex doesn't distinguish between what they are. They're all going to look like devices
Yeah.
in your configuration.
Hmm. Beautiful. Now, question for you: was there any other like interesting or standout stuff in your mind of feedback or things since the launch of the MXM?
I think I commented on the big ones.
Hmm.
There are probably other things. Let me look through my notes here that I probably won't bring up today. Well, yeah, there'll be things I'm not going to bring up today. Like, so, was maybe a comment here, a comment there. What it is. But I think the biggest thing that the biggest takeaway that I took away, and I always am something I'm very thankful for, is our customers.
Hmm.
Right? They expect a lot out of us, and I never want to disappoint them. And so,
Nice.
as a result of that, I always love your feedback. I always love you being passionate about the brand, passionate
Hmm.
about our products, and wanting us to be the best we can be. And our goal, that is always our goal, is to delight you,
Yeah.
right? If there's other things you want to see or other things you want to have happen out there, you can definitely look into it and look at that.
It made me very happy to see it start integrating with like all the ecotech and all the other gear again.
Mhm.
I love the fact of like when a controller can interface with as many things as possible, right? It can control everything. Like, so, closer to that direction, I think, is always
Um,
amazing to see.
oh yes, definitely. And
Yeah.
that's like the goal of the MXM, is bringing all of our brands. If you want an
Hmm.
experience essentially in one app, we give you that solution so you can get more out of your product. So
Yeah.
AFS, working with your Vortex, working with your lights, working with your Versa, all, or
Yeah.
your core, right? Um, the only other thing that I wanted to talk about feedback, it was not MXM related, but
Mm-hmm.
there were, we had to do some updates to Fusion. You
Mm-hmm.
probably appreciate these updates being from the IT field. But essentially, what happened was that older devices that ran essentially could not be updated past like iOS 16,
Yeah.
right? So we're talking iOS 12, 14, 13, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, all these stopped receiving official Apple support in 2019,
Yeah.
right? And so these are older iPads more often than anything. Nobody's
Yeah.
really using iPhone 8 anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're probably, but no one's using a 7 or anything like that. Like people are, you upgrade your experience in phones all the time. But you do have that old iPad that was just sitting at your aquarium and running. So what
Yeah.
did we do and why did we do it? Well, essentially, um, the things that were in those older iOSs get deprecated. In
Mm-hmm.
particular, those are related specifically to security.
Yep.
Okay, so keeping your connection secure, keeping your information secure.
Mm-hmm.
They leave behind some things and they institute new things, right? If you don't constantly keep updating to the new things, eventually your stuff doesn't work with what most people have, like
Mm-hmm.
their new devices and things like that. And so there were certain things that was in iOS 12 or 13 that we had to essentially kind of can and go to the next stage, right, in terms of security. The other part of this is also accessibility, right? So that person that is colorblind or that person that is, deaf or mute or blind or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
who do use our products, those sort of things you kind of always just to make sure you're on the latest and greatest. And and for those reasons too, you have to update the support of those
Yeah.
things. So a lot of people were like, "Oh my gosh, I updated my Apex and it stopped. Now I can't use my old iPad."
Yeah.
Um, I do have sympathy for your situation, but it wasn't you updating your Apex that caused that. It was going to happen irregardless
Yeah.
because we have Fusion, right?
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So, all right. So, super, super old devices aren't going to support the Near Fusion app because of Apple backend changes and protocols that have been updated for security
it's
reasons.
it's not the app, it's the web view,
Yeah.
right? So one thing that's really cool about the app is it does have in-app experiences and native experiences, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially it uses apexfusion.com as a lot of its a lot of the view, right? So when you're on the dashboard and turning things on and off, that's
Mm-hmm.
essentially a wrapped web view,
Yeah.
right? And why Fusion is cool because it's also an app, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as a result of that, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Your device is going to stop being supported. One thing we could have done better at is giving people some warning.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe weeks ahead of time, be like, "Hey, we're going to update soon, and when we do this, this will happen." And then also just calling out to release notes.
Yeah.
I had to demonstrate where those were in Fusion because most people aren't going to typically look at those things, but we did. That wasn't the release notes for the update.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big thing is if we could give people a little bit more warning that was coming, that would have been helpful for them.
Now, the yield question, can they still access it from the web browser on their old
No,
school?
so if they were on an
Yeah.
old device, no,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
the real reason why this doesn't work, it's not the app that doesn't work. It's
Yeah.
actually apexfusion.com that doesn't work, right?
Okay.
And could they use local? No, because when we update the web pages in Fusion,
Mm-hmm.
we update Fusion, we also update the local web pages as well.
Yeah.
There just comes a point when the manufacturer of the devices, i.e. Apple,
Yeah.
i.e. Google with Android and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, basically force us to move forward as well.
Yeah.
And
So
that's happened here.
from my non-reefer hat, but my day job IT security hat, any old devices that are no longer patched are always a security hole on your network and a potential vulnerability. Even like little kids' iPads and those whatever things, right? Anything doesn't get updates is usually going to add risk to your network. So it is always a good idea to keep yourself updated.
Yeah,
General IT tech tips.
it's kind of crazy,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're a person that doesn't access your devices very often. Like you have a camera in your home, and you're like, oh, I only use the web view on that. I never do anything.
Mhm.
Then just make sure you have auto updates on,
Yeah.
because that camera could
Or
be,
what
or tell.
actually, yeah, I actually don't allow mine to go to the internet, so they're local only, just to
Yeah,
cut off all
yeah,
risk. But
yeah.
yeah.
So, and you can put your tinfoil hat on and too as well, right? So
Hmm.
that was sorry, I don't know if that was a too low, Paul. Too low.
Oh no. It's I do a lot of security stuff and I realize how much stuff is terrible and leaked and holes and yeah. So it's definitely very, very wise to keep your stuff, updated. And if your stuff's really, really, really old, maybe time to, upgrade your main one and then take your current
Yeah.
one and use that as your display tablet or whatever you want to do. So
Yeah,
food for
yeah.
thought.
So, I do apologize to people that they lost their display
Hmm.
tablets or anything like that. One thing I'll make sure we do a better job in the future is letting you know that like that's in the pipeline, and so you can be a little bit more prepared for it. But there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. We had to.
Yeah.
So,
I have an iPad that lives on my desk that is my display tablet for my tanks and cameras and all that fun stuff. So yeah, it's good. It also works. It's new enough. Yes.
yes. Eventually, it'll also be left behind. My
Yeah.
current
One day.
iPad that I use for fun, Netflix or whatever is
Hmm.
it will be deprecated soon. I know. So
Borderline.
yeah, it's borderline getting
Yep.
there. So
Yeah. All right,
any
Paul. I think we covered most things. I mean, we're a good hour in, so I'm not going to keep you all night. But I think it was a good overhaul of food for thought of people preventing disasters in their tank in the first place,
yeah,
and some good strategies to be either alerted of failure or have a backup plan to deal with it, and hopefully keep that tank for years and years to come.
I think that there probably is a deep dive somewhere in
Hmm.
this. At some point in the future we could do, because these topics can get fairly complicated very quickly,
They
right?
can.
What will you do when this goes wrong? What will you do when that goes wrong? But really good, just general, kind of
Yep.
conversation.
That might be fun to actually do one day. Is like literally go through every single piece of gear and be like, all right, what's the continuity plan for
Yeah,
this?
I
And
mean, it's the insight folks can get from that is just great,
yep.
And so I would love to do something like that.
All right,
So
we'll do it in a future one.
in the
All right,
future,
guys. Paul, thank you for coming on tonight.
yeah,
Hopefully,
man, this was fun as
yes,
usual.
it's always good. Niagara Fire Curls, John for Vermont. Thank you guys for the super chat, much appreciated. Yeah, as always, you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button. Got any questions you want Paul and I to dig into on a future stream? Let me know in the comments below, and we will review that later for a future stream. All right,
Awesome.
guys. Happy Wednesday, guys.
Bye.
Bye.